All right, how's everybody doing? Glad to be back to doing a nice little Tuesday night live stream. Yeah, unfortunately, last week I had to miss a little live. Had some issues with the dog, and fortunately things are good. So I know a lot of people reached out, and I appreciate that. So we were able to get that all kind of under control as much as possible. But anyway, not to dwell on anything negative, we want to talk some good whiskey and stuff tonight. So tonight will be a lot of fun. So if you guys remember back, man, this is maybe going backwards or back maybe not quite a year ago, but pretty darn close. I had Nick on when they were releasing or had just released batch 1 and 2. And originally going back before we bring Nick on, I reached out to them because I was fascinated by what the labels were, what they were saying things were. It was something different than bourbon or rye. And I reached out. They were really good about getting some things to me. Tried batches 1 and 2, blown away. I mean, I couldn't have been more excited for what it was I was tasting, what they were going to be doing. And I knew shortly thereafter, we had to get them on, which we did, talk through a lot of batch 1 and 2. So some of the people in the chat right here were part of the whiskey tasting we then did, I think this past summer, I believe is what it was. Had a great time, exposed some people to some really nice Canadian whiskeys with some twists, and Nick will get into some of that from batch 1 and 2, and then the new releases batch 3 and 4. But yeah, so I know you guys are fairly familiar with some of this stuff, but I want him to kind of go through a few more things, let everybody know what they've been up to, what's been released, and kind of where things are going. So let me just say hi to a few people in the chat here real quick. Marty was in. I think Marty's still live streaming right now. But Sugar Kitty, Roy, how's it going, buddy? Brett, my man, good to see you. Kenny Killingsworth, Kenny, good to see you. Christopher David, how's it going, Chris? I know Jason reached out to you about the website stuff, so I don't know if you saw the email or not. Top Dog, how's it going? The Dart, how's it going, buddy? Kelsey, my man, how are you? Cameron Lochner, happy birthday, buddy. Uncorked, how's it going? Brett, good to see you. Johnny T, good to see you. The Turkster, how's it going, Mr. Turk? How are you, buddy? Michelle Martin, Michelle, good to see you. I know she was part of the original tasting. My man from the north, Alex, how's it going, buddy? Good to see you. Katie, the boss. Someone's got to keep the other guy in line. Good to see you. Big Vic, how's it going, bud? Old man Bourbon, how are you? What else we got? David Base. Sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong. Andy Todd, how's it going? 21090. Lead into an hour from now. They are going live, so I'll drop a link in a little bit in the description. But anyway, Pigsley, how's it going, buddy? Junik, good to see you. Bacon Stuffed Donut. All right, can't go wrong with that name. Jeez, Bacon Stuffed Donut. That's pretty badass, actually. Cool running. All right, I think we're all caught up. Mr. Evans, how's it going? And thank you for the patronage. I believe saw that today. Thank you very much. Matt J. Raji, how's it going, Mr. Sanchez? All right. Let me stop this. I'll bring in Nick here, and we'll kind of get going at some of these things, and we'll let him explain what's kind of been going on with Found North. So, all right, let's go here. Let me bring this up real quick. There's the man. How are you?
Hey, what's up?
Good. You're always the best guest because you're never like short of words, which is really good from our side. When you have to host a certain thing, at some point you like the person who will be very exuberant about what it is they're talking about, and you're always very good with that. So we appreciate that.
Oh man, no, it gets me in trouble. It gets me in trouble a lot. I got in trouble with my wife driving home today for talking too much. So it's a curse at times, but I'm glad it does work out well when I'm here. But hi everyone. I gotta tell you, being backstage is super fun. I like being backstage and watching you talk to people. It's like, it's cool to see everybody in here. Thanks everybody for popping in, and obviously I know you're here for Scott, but hopefully I can add a little jazz to your Tuesday night.
You will definitely add some jazz to this Tuesday night. So well, thanks Thanks for joining tonight. Appreciate everything. Really, I mean, from the get-go, I mean, as soon as I tasted, again, going back a little bit, like I was saying before, when I had the chance to try batches 1 and 2 with very little expectation, didn't really understand what I was going to be getting myself into, and tried those, and I almost had to take a step back thinking, well, this Canadian whiskey can't really be this good, can it? You got to taste it. You're like trying to somehow scrutinize it. And then you kind of just finally realize that, no, it's pretty badass. It's just really good whiskey. And I was really happy that we were able to ultimately, kind of hook up and kind of do some of these things and ultimately, do a tasting, which we did kind of months after the live stream, and really expose some people. So I guess, why don't we do this rather than jumping right into batches 3 and 4 for anybody who's new to Found North? I'd love for you to kind of explain a little bit about the hows and whys, when, all of that, and kind of just kind of catch people up, fill them in a little bit, if you don't mind.
Yeah, no, I love a chance to do that. Yeah. Yeah, so we launched Found North last year. I think March was our official launch, and we had been working on it for about a year prior to that, which feels like a long time, but honestly, it's like it went by fast. And when we were really conceptualizing the idea, honestly, it was relatively simple from a whiskey standpoint. From a whiskey standpoint, we appreciated that there was a lot of good rye coming out of Canada, period.
Mm-hmm.
And there was, we were talking a little about this in the just in backstage before we started here. There's momentum for Canadian rye, and I think there was a appreciation that that rye from Canada was actually good, and not maybe what people think of when they think of Canadian whiskey. And that was obviously it grew from there, but that was the seed of the idea. Let's take really good rye whiskey, let's blend it, bottle it, and shape it in general to be optimized for an American whiskey drinker's palate. And then let's be upfront about the fact that it's Canadian. And that's not to say that that's not to say that our we're not putting a flag in transparency. I think a lot of people have done that. It's like, hey,
yeah,
look at us. We tell you what's in our whiskey, And it's like, honestly, for us, my brother always says it, and it's kind of become a term in our company. But for us, we call that table stakes, right? It's like, we didn't want to come to the table and not ante up where the whiskey's from. You know what I mean? It's just like, if we're gonna get into this business and we're gonna get into making our own whiskey, I don't think there's much enjoyment in whiskey if I personally don't have the context around it. And the context for me isn't necessarily the brand messaging. It's much more the rationale, the reasoning, the liquid, and more importantly, I guess, how it sort of fits into the broader picture of whiskey. And so for us, the opening was just, let's go see what really good rye from Canada looks like, and let's see if we can create a brand around it that has good whiskey, good liquid, good value, and then let's be straightforward about it. That was sort of the beginning of the brand. What I think really took the brand to a completely different level was batch 2, and I think, like a lot of things, batch 2 was a combination of getting kind of being opportunistic and getting a little bit lucky in the sense that when we were originally making the first rye, so many of the ryes that were coming to market that were from Canada, whether they were stated from Canada or not, but that we knew were coming from Canada, were 100% ryes. And when we were making batch 1 as 100% rye, we didn't like it that much. and honestly for good reason. Rye, it's really interesting. Batch 1 and batch 3, which are the 2 ryes we've made, took about 90% of the blending time. So the time that it took to blend batch 1 and batch 3 versus batch 2 and batch 4 is almost 10 to 1.
Interesting.
Because rye is incredibly difficult to work with. Incredibly difficult to work with, because the thing that we like about rye is also the thing that we don't like about whiskey, right? So, and what I mean by that is, if you like spicy, like real juicy spice, I'm talking serious spice notes in your rye, that's coming with astringency, right?
Yeah.
Like rye is dry, and I don't mean pleasantly tannic. I mean dry, like when we were getting 100% ryes, they were getting great flavor, the flavor we were looking for. But on the finish, it was honestly like somebody putting a cigarette out in the back of your throat. I mean, it's that like biting roof of the mouth, back palate cut. I mean, it's cutting. And when we were working with the distilleries, we were working with one distiller, and he basically was like, yeah, of course. When I explained, I was like, I love the flavor, but do you have anything that's less astringent? And he was like, no, there's a reason why we use corn in Canada.
Yeah.
And he was like, and by the way, there's a reason why you guys use corn in America. Like, wake up and smell the grain here, buddy.
Yeah.
You know? And I was like, okay, well, I don't know what you guys are really talking about, but send me some corn and we'll see. You know, that I have some funny thoughts about that later. But basically, like, it was like, here, send me some corn. And we started using the corn to make the rye better. And it immediately made batch 1 into what batch 1 is. But also the corn components we were getting made us completely reconsider the entire Canadian whiskey category. Because I just didn't believe that Canadians were making corn whiskey that could be the foundation of the whiskey that I wanted. I just didn't, it just hadn't happened. So I didn't know it was possible, you know? And so when we were making batch 2 was supposed to be a rye. And as we were sort of blending it and we were increasing this particular corn component, the more corn heavy it got, the better the blend. And eventually we got to the point where it was about 50-50, and it was by far the best blend we had made. And we said, okay, we have to try it at 60-40 just to know. And it was better at 60-40 corn to rye. And we said, crap, we've got a problem. Because I mean, we had spent 9 months creating an entire brand, all the copy, everything around, like, we're this rye company and we're going to be this, you know, innovator of the rye space. And that was what we were so confident on. But the whiskey was just really, really good. And I think when we first conceptualized the idea of bringing rye that's Canadian to the US consumer, we were very excited about that, because we thought we could do it in a more straightforward and a really interesting way that maybe opened some minds about Canadian rye. And what the corn ended up doing, we said, all right, we'll just blend this thing. It ended up being at its absolute best at 80% corn, 20% rye. And we said, we're gonna blend this thing. It'll never sell. That, honest to God, we had a conversation. We were like, this is going to be the hardest thing we ever have to sell, because aged rye at a reasonable price, cast strength, non-chill filtered, all these things, has a market that we know exists. But, you know, aged whatever whiskey, we call it cast strength whiskey. We honestly aren't even sure if we're allowed to give it a Canadian whiskey designation, because it's bottled here. In the States. So, like, by their regulation, it may not even be Canadian. And by our regulations, it's not bourbon. So, like, what the hell is it? And so for us, we were like, whatever, we'll have this, and people who taste it will appreciate what it is and buy it. And over time, we'll move through batch 2. And then, of course, batch 2, everybody loved batch 2. And that really changed the dynamic from, hey, Found North is all about the discovery of rye from Canada, to Found North is all about like we want to bring premium Canadian whiskey to the premium American consumer, and in the process have the joy and the privilege of bringing the American consumer along to kind of a space that maybe they're less familiar with. And for us, when it comes down to like being in the whiskey, yeah, Matt's got it right? Like Matt just wrote American Canadian style whiskey. Exactly. Like how the bleep do you market that? But honestly, like for us, when we thought about the opportunity of taking guys and gals who are in the chat right now and saying, hey, like you've had enough of these whiskeys, they're great. Like you want to try something that's slightly different that will take the palate that you really love and just stretch it a little, just give it a little bit of something else. And that was and is the entire conception of the brand. The idea was the idea was very simple. Let's bring good liquid to the consumer at a good price.
Yeah.
Period.
Well, I think for me, like, the first thing I saw was, the ages, and everyone loves an age statement, so you see a big age statement, you start to think, well, this has got to be good, right? Well, I'm like, let's put this to the test. Let's see what this Canadian whiskey, or whatever you want to call it, it's kind of a rye. It's kind of a rye and a corn whiskey, kind of different.
Right? Yeah.
A rye and a corn, and I'm like, well, they have great ages. Let's see how these guys are gonna kind of shake out, and just trying them, it was so different than really anything I had ever had. Big and bold and spicy and viscous and citrusy and in a lot of all these great things. And I was like, there's just no way this can be like what I never thought it could be. I was just blown away. And I'll be very interested to kind of hear the concept of, like, I know you guys kind of worked off of batch 1 and 2 to kind of hopefully what you thought made 3 and 4, on par with those, or maybe slightly better, or whatever it may be. But I was just, I still kind of stumble over the idea of what exactly this is, and just really how good they are. And you can't just tell somebody what this tastes like, because I don't think there's really that many people who've had the opportunity to try something necessarily like this. It's so different than anything I've ever had, all in a great way, by the way. So I'll say this right now: anybody who has an opportunity, and to get either or these, and we'll go through batches 3 and 4, which are available on the site right now, I believe. Correct. Yep. I'll drop a link. I'll drop a link here in a minute. If you guys trust me, I know people say that all the time, trust me, but trust me, you can't go wrong with either one. I think you'll be blown away by either one. It kind of depends. And again, before you maybe decide, we'll kind of run through a slight little tasting, kind of give you an idea of what batches 3 and 4 kind of have to offer. And if one or both sound good and you want to pull the trigger, then go for it. So before we get into batches 3 and 4, though, what I wanted to kind of talk about, which we were talking a little bit before we went live, is 2022 maybe the year of Canadian whiskey in the States? And I'd love to hear your kind of thoughts on that, owning a kind of a Canadian Canadian brand, basically. So what are your thoughts on that?
Man, that's a great question. I think I think the conditions are right. I think the conditions are right for it to happen. It's a funny thing to say. Honestly, it's a really funny thing to say that, like, this is going to be the year for Canadian in the US, because this fact blows people away. Whenever I tell people this, it just blows my mind. And I, but we'll see how people react to it here. But from 1865 until 2010, right? So 145 years. If I don't think I've drank enough where that math is that bad, but somewhere in there. Or is it? That's right? Okay, good.
Yeah.
So for 145 years, from a consumption standpoint, the number one selling whiskey from just like a pure volume standpoint in the United States was Canadian whiskey. So like it has only been the last 11 years or 12 years or so that bourbon has topped it as a category, which is insane to me because like I think about Canadian and when we sell, we go into stores and we see where they put it. We're really curious just to see where they place it on the shelves. Do they put it in the bourbon section? Do they put it in the rye section? Like, do they put it in the international whiskey section? And it's amazing how few places have like a Canadian whiskey section. So how is it that this category has done so incredibly well from a volume standpoint, and yet we're still talking about it as like, hey, could it have its year? And I think that speaks a lot to where Canadian has done well in the past and where it has this big wide open space. And obviously it's done really well in the past as a volume sales kind of product. And the interesting thing is, how will it do as more of a premium category? And I think when I think about whiskey drinkers, I think there are a lot more spirits drinkers today than there were 5 years ago. And I don't mean any type of spirits. I mean people who are more willing to try a wider variety of spirits. 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, people kind of had their category, and that's what they drank. And I think there's been, in large part because of a bunch of different factors, but you look at companies that have really paved the way for a company like ours, and we have an enormous amount of respect for those companies. I love those companies because I think they're doing the entire industry a great service, because like we want to get real philosophical, but like, what's the point of drinking and trying interesting stuff? To me, there's 2 points. One, it is an exploration. The whole label for us, like the whole label is not just representative of Found North, but it's very much representative of like how we feel about spirits. And so for those of you who haven't ever seen a bottle up close, we have all of these sort of topographical maps. The idea was there are trailheads all over the bottle that are sort of on the bottle itself, and this the word Found North for us was very much about discovery, right? And it's this idea of exploration and discovery. And so the category of spirits in general is very much about finding things that you love, finding new things, feeling the connection to the place, feeling a connection to the history, feeling a connection to the fellow hunter, explorer, right? Like there's nothing more fun than when you find a bottle of something that you really love and sharing it with somebody who also hunts out great bottles and is like, wow, I want to hear the story. I want to drink that. Like nothing gets me more giddy. Honestly, that's like the number one reason I'm in the industry. And so when you look at the broader category and you look at a company like Foursquare, right? That's a great example of a company that has paved the way for brands like ours, because companies that have basically said, maybe you have had bad rum in the past, but the reason you've had bad rum in the past is because it's loaded with sugar, it's made with bad ingredients, it's basically not made in the right way. You don't dislike the category, you dislike the practices within that category. And so it's really super interesting to see Armagnac make a big comeback, right? Like we just like before Found North existed and we were just an importation company, we imported a little bodega, just like a tiny little distillery, Domaine de Charon, which is just a little bit of a tiny little Armagnac company. And it was the same thing. They were doing everything in New Oak. They weren't adding boisé. They weren't adding sugar. They weren't adding anything to it. It was all single casks. And it was amazing the response we got, not from the Armagnac drinker. We got that response from the bourbon drinker, right? Because the bourbon drinker was like, hey, guess what? There's a reason why I love bourbon. I love bourbon because the regulations make it so that you have to make it the right way. You can't add crap to it. You can't add caramel coloring to it. You can't rectify it. You can't do all the shit they were doing to it in the 19th century because a bunch of distillers fought for that in the early 20th century. And so what's been super interesting is seeing a lot of the distilleries and companies doing a lot of best practices and the open-mindedness of the whiskey community to say, you know what, I love whiskey, but I love it for these reasons. And if these other categories are going to behave this way, I'm at least going to give them a shot and see what it tastes like. And then, of course, a bunch of places have made good liquid doing that, right? You know, Foursquare not only does best practices, but the shit is the bomb, right? I mean, if you like me, I'm not a big rum drinker, but somebody pulls out a bottle of Foursquare, I'm like, hey, where's my Glencairn glass? Like, give me a second, I'm ready. And I feel that way about Foursquare. I feel that way about some Armagnacs. I feel that way about some of the tequilas. Like, literally, there have been so many different brands within so many different categories that have said the whiskey drinker's not as narrow-minded as we pigeonhole him or her to be. The whiskey drinker actually is much more open-minded, but they have principles about what they like. And I think that's that shift in the industry has paid dividends for both the brands that are willing to do best practices and the consumers that are like, we're going to reward you by buying this stuff. And that I think has created a landscape where a company like ours can come in here with a whiskey that's tricky to categorize, a whiskey that's not falling into a neat category very easily.
Well, I think it's one of those situations, honestly, where a lot of, you know, I guess people will say in the States, we'll keep it narrow from that standpoint. But I think it's the, you know, it's not so much the FOMO part of things. It's the understanding of whiskeys and people wanting to try some different things. And that for me is the best part, because for so long, you know, I was just, you know, bourbon and maybe a little bit of rye. Now it's like, you know, a lot of bourbon and a lot of rye. Like, I've learned to kind of like those as the years have gone along. And now trying some of these different Canadian whiskeys, you know, like you guys did. And it's just something completely different. And that I think is the fun part of whiskey, is trying something different and unique. You know, not just always having bourbon. We know what bourbon tastes like. We know what rye tastes like, but kind of stepping outside of those, you know, comfort zones and trying something, you know, very, very different. So I guess that's why, to me, I thought 2022 was just with the,
it's right.
With the way light whiskey kind of took off a lot in 21, I think now a little bit of the shift of some of these maybe higher aged Canadian whiskeys and what you guys, you know, people like you are doing with some of these things. Like, what is that profile going to be for us? And I think that's the fun part. And there's a lot of people in the chat, you know, tonight that know or have a good idea of what some of these things are. And it's just that trickle of getting people exposed to that and understanding what these profiles are. So that, like you said, the exciting part is when someone comes over and say, here, try this. I know you've never had this. Now try this, and you let me know what you think. And that's the fun part, watching people's, you know, expression. Like, oh my God, like this is so different. Like, I don't know how to describe it. And honestly, that's what batches 1 and 2 originally did. And I had a little idea of what 3 and 4 were going to be like coming off of 1 and 2. But I mean, I'm loving 3 and 4. Again, to me, they're similar, but different, if that makes sense. They both offer something very different and unique, and it's fun trying them back to back. I'll tell you that. So.
Oh man, yeah, I'm excited to taste them with you. I'm excited.
Well, before we do that, can we jump into kind of talking the progression from 1 and 2 to now 3 and 4, and what 3 and 4 kind of have to offer, I guess.
Yeah, before I do that, I see the Whiskey Dick is in here. Whiskey
Yeah, Bill.
Dictionary is giving me
Yeah,
Bill's
Bill.
giving me a hard time per usual because I talk too much.
Yeah, I
That
saw
that's
you, Bill.
yeah. And I do want to say, Alex, thank you for buying batch 4. I seriously, if you're disappointed, email me, Nick at foundnorthwhisky.com, and I'll buy it back from you. That's why I give you my word, I will. I used to do that all when I were so I started in the whiskey industry in retail, and I used to give recommendations, and every once in a while I'd give a recommendation to somebody, and they'd say, man, I don't know, like it's expensive, like, and I would be so sure that I knew their palate that I used to say, it's fine, I want that bottle, so you open it, you take it home, you pour it, if you hate it, you come back and I'll just buy it and it'll be my bottle. So I am drinking my own sauce right now, so I guess I'm pretty confident I want this.
I've not had one person honestly who's purchased a bottle, said that they didn't like it. And some people have had batches 1 and 2, some like 1 more than 2, and I guess it depends on obviously your palate. But I mean, for me, your batch 2 finished, I believe, number 2 in my whiskeys of 2021.
Yes,
and I was like, I mean, I was blown away. I mean, I don't mean to keep tooting the horn or anything like that, but I mean, it was a very, very good whiskey. All right, let's talk a little bit about batch 3, what it is, and the conception of this.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So I think a lot of you've probably had. I think some of you have probably had 1 and 2. But I'm hoping some of you have had 1 or 2. And for us, when we came in, and we knew we were going to be very upfront about being Canadian. One of the challenges with Canadian is. There's a perception that it's soft, right? So like that the expectation with Canadian whiskey is that it's going to be gentler and overly smooth, right? A little bit too easy to drink.
Mhm.
And I think for me, the when we were creating batch 1 and we were going to be so upfront about it being from Canada, we had an attitude of like, this needs to be not only be a banger, like this not only needs to taste really good to sort of fight off the notion of and the preconceptions of Canadian, but more than that, it needs to come in with a little bit of thunder. It needs to have like it needs to have big spice, right? And it was like throw trying to make this thing easy drinking out the window. Let's make this thing as much of a flavor bomb as we possibly can. And I think we did that. I think we did that well. And obviously I do. Otherwise I wouldn't have released it. But I think we kind of nailed that space of like, if you aren't ready for big rye, this thing's going to be too much for you. And that was great about batch 1. And I think the same with batch 2. Batch 2 came in at 129.8 proof, right?
Yeah,
Like we were messing around with batch 2.
No,
yeah,
no.
And we had a lot of serious whiskey reviewers come out and say, wow, 1 and 2 just ridiculously, really big, really fun. But we also had some people come in with 1 and 2 and go, oh man, this was too much for me. And that was okay. And we were all right with that. The point isn't to make a whiskey that everybody loves. I think that's pretty much impossible. But for us, we wanted to come in a little strong and just make a statement that like Canadian doesn't need to be Canadian Club. Whether you love Canadian, like, and Canadian Club does the 43-year-old, that's incredible. And like, not dogging anyone. I'm just saying like there's an expectation the Canadian had, and we needed to break that expectation immediately with our whiskeys. So that's what we did with 1. With 3, we felt like we had enough credibility with the American whiskey drinker to come in and say, okay, 1 was a spice bomb. We're going to show you a little bit of what we can do with some of the components that are allowed us with Canadian. And what was I think particularly fun about using Canadian whiskey, in very simple terms, is we don't have to use new oak. We do use some of it, but we don't have to use it. And initially, we don't have to use it right away. And this is where I think this gets like a little bit. I think one of the frustrating things for me forever with whiskey is the notion that the basically whiskey is just barrel flavor plus grain flavor equals whiskey, right? And that the only factor that time has is increasing the barrel flavor. Therefore, new barrel equals more flavor equals better whiskey. And there's that the reason time is so important is because of the oxidative process. And it does things to the whiskey that are really wonderful to the whiskey over a certain period of time. And not to get too deep into it, but basically with Canadian and all of the different barrel types we had access to, we had just a broader range of flavors to play with. And so for 3, we said, all right, we came out with a hammer that was batch 1. With 3, we still wanted to have this big rye spice backbone. We still wanted to be cast strength and have the warmth, the Canadian hug, like the really like the nice big a meaty whiskey. But we wanted to make it a little bit more elegant and also very much demonstrate the fruit side of rye, which you pretty much will not find anywhere. Because fruit is a hard flavor to preserve. And when you bombard it, and it takes time to develop that character, and when you bombard it with new oak, you're going to kill it. And so we used new oak, but we also used a lot of different, very old used oak components. And that ended up giving us access to some fruit flavors that I just, honestly, I love. My favorite comments in here, not to call anybody out or dog anybody, but my favorite comments in here are all the comments that says you can't really describe Found North until you try it. That's what I'm going for. Right. I want people to try batch 3, particularly batch 3, and go, damn, how did they get fruit in there like that? Like, wow, that's all the spice I love. But where is this quality in my life? And I want
it's like that. It's like that. Like a nice like green orchard fruit. There's that. I think there's a little bit of the, kind of like the green apple, like maybe even a little bit of like a green grape. There's a lot of that fresh kind of green fruit in there for sure. With still that really nice lingering spice, which is fantastic. But that's consistent with you guys. Spice, I think, is one of the consistent factors. That it's not necessarily heat, but it's a great spice that it has, like a nice allspice. So
thank you. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, that is really what we're going for. I just cracked a new bottle, which is always fun.
Well, you know what? It's kind of like it's kind of like the big brother and little brother from the standpoint of like I think 3 is like the younger brother and 4 is kind of like the big brother who wants to tell the little brother what to do. I mean, I think 2 and 4 are the big and bold ones, and I think 1 and 3 are the softer, spicy fruit. For me, that's my thought. I mean, 2 and 4 for me have been consistent from the standpoint of big, bold, viscous, citrusy, like orange. It's like an orange creamsicle. Like I've always gotten on 2 and 4 this like dreamsicle with a nice spice factor. I mean, it's what I like to drink. That big, bold, spicy, still fruity. Maybe some chocolates or some tobaccos or something that are in there, but it's fantastic. So I guess talking about 3 and 4. I guess let me do this while you're kind of talking about batches 3 and 4. I'm going to bring up on the screen so that people can see as you're kind of describing a little bit about what 3 and 4 kind of have to offer. So if anyone's on the fence as to what they are, I mean, I think Nick will be obviously the best one to kind of describe what 3 and 4 have to offer, but I'll bring it up here on the screen right now, and I'll show you guys what batches 3 and 4 kind of have to offer. So let's do this. So let's do 3. I'll bring up the batch right now, and this will kind of give you guys. So as you can see over to the right here, I mean, here are some of the components of 3. And again, Nick, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but batches, for people who liked the prior batches, I would say anyone who preferred batch 1 would maybe prefer batch 3 versus 2 and 4, correct?
Yeah. So basically, for us, yeah, this is a great question. So for us going forward, our white label, and just as it is now, our white label means it's rye dominant, and the blue label means it's corn dominant. So if you liked 1, there's a good chance 3 is going to be your friend, and if you like 2, there's a good chance that 4 is going to be right up your alley. And if you liked 1 and 2, you're gonna like 3 and 4.
I mean, look at these numbers. I mean, you're getting 17 to 25-year-old whiskeys that are blended, in this batch 3. A great proof, 110.2, nice like rye to corn ratio in terms of percentages. And the one thing that I really appreciated what Nick did last time in explaining these is that all of the grains are based off of, I believe you said 100% of each grain blended down. So this isn't a conventional mash bill like we think of. This is all how you guys have broken down the components of 100% grain originally, correct?
Yeah. Okay. So that's, I appreciate you bringing that up just for what people are talking about, for what he's talking about for people who may not understand. This was one of the tricky things when we first made the label. We put all the information on it, and it was the ugliest label you've ever seen because it looked like a library book that you just opened to some random page. It just was too much writing, but one of the challenges we had was we really wanted to put the grain ratio on there, but we didn't want to call it a mash bill because mash bill would be a little bit misleading, in the sense that in the US, when we do a mash bill, you're taking all the grains and you're telling the weight that went into the mash. So something that's 80% corn by a mash bill means that 80% by weight of the grain was corn. And the reason that's tricky is because the starch content in corn is much, much higher than the starch content in rye. And so when we're talking about our grain ratios, we're talking about liquid ratios. And the starch concept comes in terms of the higher starch content, the higher sugar content that you're going to get when you do the fermentation, when you actually do the mash and then the fermentation. And so when you take something that's an American mash bill that's 80% corn and 20% rye, from a liquid standpoint, like 90% of the liquid is corn and 10% of the liquid is rye. In Canada, they distill, they mash, ferment, and distill the grains separately. And what we're doing is we're blending the final liquid, which means when we say it's 60 with batch 1, when we said it was 66% rye, 30% corn, in US terms, that would actually be kind of closer to like 80-15, right? It would be much more in favor of the corn. Much more favor. It would be much higher rye content, essentially. When you look at Canadian grain ratios to equate them to American mash bills, you have to increase the rye, because if you're getting rye from liquid instead of rye by weighted grain, you're going to get way more rye by liquid, which was a nightmare. And also the thing you were showing that I was excited about is additionally we like to sort of reveal as much as we can, right? So the first whiskeys were aged 16 to 20 years, and really we had a component that was 16 years old, a component that was 17 years old, and a component that was 20 years old. With with the batch 3, it was 17. There was a 17-year-old whiskey. It made up about 10% of the blend. And then there were 2 separate 18-year-old whiskeys that made up about 54% of the blend. And then there was a 21 and a 25-year-old corn components that made up the other sort of 30 and change. And the one thing
I'll bring it back up so people can see this.
So batch 3, one of the fundamental differences between batch 1 and batch 3 is that batch 3 is made of 5 different whiskeys and batch 1 is made of 3. Doesn't feel like it's a huge difference, but whenever you're making whiskey, when you tweak something, you can't help but tweak all of the other flavors. So the more variables there are, like every time you add a variable, it doesn't make it proportionately more complex. It makes it like an order of magnitude more complex. So making a 5 whiskey blend was like the hardest thing we've ever done. It was damn hard. Honestly, like trying to get them all to a point of equilibrium was really hard. And for those of you, if you buy the bottle itself, one of the interesting things is you'll see the maturation says American oak, right? And M. Evans just asked about this, right?
Yeah.
How's the Hungarian oak differ from the American oak? What we've tried to do is there were like 5 different lots that were in this whiskey, and each one had a different aging regimen that included multiple different barrel types. So putting in there like all our maturation would look stupid and honestly like be way too much information. We'd rather you be able to come get it on the website. But what we tried to do was for the maturation, we tried to put in there the most important whiskey, like the whiskey that was the linchpin of the whiskey. So with batch 1, the linchpin was this 16-year-old rye that was aged in Hungarian oak. In batch 3, we used Hungarian oak. We used ex-tequila barrels. We used Speyside Scotch casks. We used Hungarian oak again in the one of the corn components. But we used this incredibly important corn component. It was a 21-year-old whiskey that was aged in American oak. It was actually aged in used American oak. And it's super interesting when we were blending this corn component was bringing all of this really kind of juicy tannins to the end of to sort of the end of the whiskey, to the back end of the whiskey. And we were getting all of this lovely finish from one of the corn components. And with the rye, we were getting all of this flavor up front. So when you taste batch 3, the second you nose it, there's just an explosion of fruit and spice and the things we've been talking about. When you drank it, though, when we first were drinking it, no matter what we did with the blends, we kept having this dead zone. The whiskey was incredibly bimodal. So basically, like you were getting all the flavor on the front and then all the flavor on the back, but there was this big gap in the mid palate. And we found this 21-year-old corn component that was aged exclusively in used American oak. It spent so much time in wood, it had developed all of this lovely fruit notes, but the corn gave it so much viscosity and body. And it really took that sort of opening, that sort of opening, cannon shot of flavor and that nice finish, and it gelled them together in a way that honestly no other whiskey was doing. And it became such an important point with the whiskey that we made it kind of the declared maturation. That being said, with the first whiskey, in the same way, we built the entire whiskey around this Hungarian oak component that was throwing really, really interesting spice notes. So basically with us, the stated maturation is more so what was the most important barrel and what was the most important component to making this whiskey work was the best we could do. And then we'll reveal the rest on the website and through media, like, hey, this is what it is. And we try to be pretty upfront about all the ratios and all the aging regimens, et cetera.
Yeah. It's such a good blend and different. And it's not so different that it's going to like shock you. Like it's something funky or anything. It's just, it's delicious. It's a easy, mean, for 110 plus proof, it's really easy to drink. I mean, that's one of the things. So now batch 3, again, like Nick was saying, I think it's kind of some of those lighter fruits. The spice is definitely there. I would say for both of them, you have to appreciate a little bit of a spice in a whiskey. It's just that those are there. You're not going to eliminate, those there. But I mean, it's one of those things. Sometimes it's hard to necessarily put it in words to try to describe what this tastes like to somebody. So, all right. So you guys kind of have a little bit of idea of what batch 3 is. Let's shift to batch 4. Let's talk a little bit about 4 and kind of how that all kind of came about.
Yeah, I just wanted to answer one quick question from Biking Bourbon asked, where are we located? Whew, hell of a question. One that we have trouble.
You wouldn't think that's an overly difficult question to ask, like, where are we from?
Yeah. But you wouldn't think that would be hard to answer. Honestly, we had our we originally had offices when we started as a company, originally as just an importation company. And then when COVID hit, we couldn't go into our offices. And so we were like, well, why do we have offices anymore? And so for the last 2 years, our entire team has operated just purely work from home, which means that like we have 3 different guys on our team who are all located around Boston, and we have one in New York. That being said, our bottling facility is very interesting. Our first bottling facility was in Brooklyn. So if you look at the back of batch 1 and 2, for those who are like really getting crazy about this, that you'll see it was bottled in Brooklyn. The new ones will say it's bottled in Dover, New Hampshire, 3 and 4, which is where our new site is. They have the not that we had any problem with Red Hook where we were bottling before, but we wanted a little bit more warehouse space because we started to age some single barrels there, and we needed a bigger facility, and so we are distilled in various places in Canada, aged in various places in Canada, aged in various places in New Hampshire, blended in Massachusetts and New York, and bottled in New Hampshire. So you tell me where we're located.
Your location is a bit like your location is a bit like your whiskeys, a blend of a lot of different kinds of things.
A blend of a lot of ideas.
Yeah, a lot of different things. So, all right. So you can talk about batch 4. I'll share that again here real quick. Let me get rid of then you guys can see what the components of batch 4 and stuff are. So let me get rid of this real quick. I'll bring this back up here, and we got to give you guys an idea of what batch 4 is all about. I mean, I think for a lot of us who are into a lot of the big, bold flavors of American style whiskeys, I think you guys will really appreciate what it is that 4 has to offer. So here you go. Let me know. I think that will probably look really good. Okay, there you go. So fire away.
Yeah. So so basically when we made batch 2, it was much more of just, we had this one particular component, we loved it, let's build a whiskey around it. And then that whiskey was very popular, and it provided a sort of a new opportunity for us within the space of whiskey and within the space of Canadian whiskey. And we said, look, we can make these very sort of bourbon-esque or bourbon adjacent Canadian whiskeys. And with batch 2, it was like, let's just make this. With batch 4, it was very much a, wait a second. Okay, there are these really cool corn components that we have access to that we really love. And let's show off a little bit of what they can do. And whereas I think batch 1 and 3 was much more of kind of like a, hey, we did this here and let's compare and contrast it to here. Batch 4 was, hey, everybody liked this aspect of batch 2, which was kind of the sweet, the caramel, the fruit that were all very much sort of overdeveloped without that corresponding sort of dry oaky note that you usually get with overaged bourbons. So let's go deeper into that space. And we had a 1996 bit of corn that was aged in 1996 that was aged in Hungarian oak. And good God, I mean, it was so good and so interesting. It was throwing all of this kind of demerara and molasses and taking the classic bourbon notes that I love personally of like wood sugar and caramel and vanilla and concentrating the holy hell out of them, right? And so like when I think of like sugar and caramel in a much more concentrated form, I think of like I think I described it somewhere as like you know, a boiling river of molasses, you know, just like very concentrated crystallized sweetness and almost that wood that starts presenting kind of a very Canadian forest maple note, that pine forest, that resin that we like in overaged bourbons. And I was and with Sammy, who's my sort of partner in crime when it comes to blending, he's one of the guys on our team. When Sammy and I sort of started messing around with this particular corn component, we were like, this is going to be the centerpiece of a whiskey, and we're going to build something around it. And we used 2 18-year-old ryes that were aged in D-char, which is awesome. So basically D-char rechar is when they scrape the inside of the barrel and then they rechar it. It has a great influence on the whiskey because you don't quite get as much dry tannin, but you do get a lot of good wood flavor. And so you don't get as much bitterness, but you do get some wood. And it worked lovely. It worked incredibly well with the rye. And we used our favorite. We have this rye component that we've used in 3 of our 4 whiskeys. That's aged in ex-Speyside Scotch casks. It's particularly tricky to get that like lovely verdant sort of green note that you were talking about. That green kind of fruit note. I knew right when you said it. I knew exactly what you're talking about. It's in both the whiskeys, and it's this Speyside Scotch cask aged rye, which is such a weird thing to say. But it ends up not throwing as much astringency. It gives you some spice, but it gives this really lovely fruit note. And so we used those to kind of round it out. And then we used a 21-year-old corn that was aged for 13 years in used oak and then transferred into new wood for 8 years. And all in all, what we were just trying to do is like, let's see. Nathan's asking me about the finish. So we were basically saying like, let's see what we can make here, and then let's see how much we can just stretch these flavors out. And I think with the fundamental difference between batch 2 and batch 4 is batch 2 is like bang, right? It's like this huge explosion of flavor, and you're just oh, okay, wow, here I am. Batch 4 is like there's a bang, but then it's just like, hey, let's see how long this can go.
It's a little more like that's a good point. I mean, I think 4, and I'm glad you said it because 2 was exactly that. It was a lot of all those good things, but right away, like boom, here you go. But 4 is much more like refined. It's all of that. It's big and bold. It doesn't just come and punch you right in the gut though right away. There's a little bit more of a whiskey evolution, if that makes any sense. It's all of that stuff there. It's just very well balanced. I'll say I mean, 2 and 4 for me in my palate is what I prefer. 1 and 3, you hate to say they're lighter. I mean, they're not necessarily lighter. They're just they're not as bold as 2 and 4. I don't think, from my personal opinion. You know,
I think they're
but
they're
different.
a little less concentrate. Like when you drink 4 more than I think any whiskey we made. When you drink 4, I just took a sip of it about a minute and a half ago, and it is just there's still a maple sugar, like maple syrup note that's just chilling there on the back of my palate. And that was, I mean, it was so fun. Honestly, I think, I would say, it's funny. I think one of the number one questions I ever get is like, what's your favorite of the whiskeys you made? And I honestly, like, it really is. People are like, oh, that's like asking you what your favorite kid is. I don't have any kids yet, but I feel like if you ask me which of my dogs is my favorite, it's like it's really difficult, right? I like them for different reasons,
right.
But I think, like, from some of the things we did with 4, I'm about as excited about that. I might be more proud of 3 than any other whiskey we've ever made for particular reasons, because I just think that I think there's something particularly exciting about making whiskey that is familiar but very different. You know, it's like, oh yes, this is a category I know and love, but it's like taking a dance and doing it in a way that nobody's done it before. You're like, oh yeah, it's still the same steps, but like, wow, that guy did it that way, or that woman did it that way, right? It's pretty cool. So I was really excited about 4. One, I just wanted to answer one question. Matt Dart asked how much of the Scotch barrel comes through. It doesn't taste very scotchy in the sense that
I would agree.
There's none of the barley. Malted barley has a very particular note that I happen to love. I was originally a single malt drinker. That was the first thing I ever drank. But from a whiskey standpoint, the first thing I ever drank was probably wine at my dad's table. But like the first thing I really ever got into with whiskey was single malt Scotch, and single malt and Scotch has that I can't say anything, but it's Scotchy, right? It's got that like Scotchy, malty, barley kind of. If you ever have the pleasure of going to Scotland and visiting the distilleries, you can smell the mash from a mile away. It's got a very particular kind of barley, malted, kind of bready shortbread note. Absolutely none of that. None of that comes through whatsoever in the Scotch barrel. The thing that comes through, though, is when you have single malt, the nice thing about single malt is it's aged in a very temperate climate. And so your oxygen influence is quite large. And so you get this, you do get this kind of lovely, there are lovely fruit notes in single malt Scotch, particularly hilariously ex-bourbon aged single malt Scotch. And you get some of those notes unquestionably on there. Just some of the interesting orchard fruit notes, I would say. Honestly, Scott nailed it. The kind of green fruit notes, the fresh apple, almost grapey notes. Those are very much from the Scotch barrel.
Yeah, it's nice. And Matt, like I mean, for me, I'm not a huge Scotch guy, but and for me, there's nothing, there's nothing that I'm tasting what I would interpret as like, heavy barley or anything like that. There's maybe that little twist that's there, but it's really nice. It's like a spicy fresh fruitcake, or if that makes any sense. It's really nice. I mean, 3 for me is one of those. I guess if I was going to define these two, 3 is the one I would go to if I didn't necessarily want to be blown away. If I want a really delicious whiskey that's not going to, I'm not going to have to worry about the complex. I don't have to worry about the complexity of it. Like, I just know I'm going to get a delicious whiskey. If I go to 4, like 4 is the one you want to sit down, take your time with, and just enjoy all of the components of it. Like, that's how I look at a lot of whiskeys, is that for me, the complexity and layers of whiskey is kind of important to me. So that's like even when we do barrel picks, there's certain things I'm looking for that I want that whiskey to be. And both of these they're different. It's a bit unfair to release them like at the same time, because what naturally happens is people want to compare them. And I don't think you really can compare them necessarily. I think it's unfair to kind of do it. So
they're completely different categories.
They are.
Like, seriously, they're completely different categories. Yeah, I think you sort of got the nail on the head with that. It's interesting though. For me, I think perhaps personally, from a complexity standpoint, I don't know if anything was more that we've made is more complex than batch one, hilariously. Largely because when I had batch one, when we were making batch one, the fun thing about batch one is when you taste it the first time, you get a bunch of notes. And then if you pour it again, that's just like right away, you'll get different notes the second time. And if you pour it again the third time, which I have done plenty of, because well, because then you get then you still get tertiary notes. And I think I think 2 and 4 present a lot of complexity right off the bat. When you taste them, you're like, wow, there's a lot going on. Well, honestly, 4 even more than 2. 2, I think, is just such a flavor bomb right off the bat. It's like, it just strums, and you're like, oh, okay, I love that sound. Well, at least that's how I feel about it. With 4, it's a little bit more of a song where you're like, oh, okay, wow, this has some evolution and progression.
I look at 4 a lot like how I look at bourbons. Like it just naturally is what I do. I mean, obviously being, big bourbon and rye guy, it's just, I look at the layers and the complexity. I know you and I are using the term complexity differently because you're the one blending these, so all of what it is that's going into it. But from a layman's standpoint, in terms of trying to describe, like if I just had to describe 3 and 4, I would say, 3 is a fruitier, for me, easier drinking whiskey, and then 4 is like the big, bold, like brother to it, kind of. I mean, it's. Really, I mean, I know that's simple, and you're probably this guy's a jerk. Listen to him explain.
No, definitely not. I think it's cool that I really like that. That's how it presents to you. When I think about complexity within whiskey, I really think there's 2 directions with it. I think there's complexity in the sense that as you taste it, it has a progression. I don't particularly, I find that I enjoy whiskeys all the time that don't have a very noticeable progression, right? They hit a note, they nail the note, I like the note. And when I want that note, I pour the whiskey, right? Boom. That's how I drink whiskey. Right. But there are also whiskeys that that have a really fascinating journey that they take you on. Right. My bourbon journey. Right. There are bourbons and whiskeys where as I'm drinking it, I'm like, holy hell, I can't believe it went that way. Right. And that's really exciting. I think there's a third description of complexity that I've grown a little bit to appreciate of late, which is a whiskey where when you sip it, maybe it hits 1 note or 2 notes, but when you sip it again, it hits other notes, and then when you sip it again, it presents other notes. And I think there's it's, for me, it's really fun to pour a whiskey where I feel the need to revisit it. And for me, I think 4, and this is just me over talking about my own children here, but for me, 4, very much when I drink it, I love the story it tells. And I reach for that story all the freaking time. But when I pour like 1 and 3, both of them surprise me all the time. I like legitimately get surprised where I'm like, interesting. It tastes like that right now. Like, oh wow, okay, it tastes like that right now. That was intentionally done to some degree. We wanted it to be something that really deserved a second pour with our whiskey. We always want our whiskeys to deserve a second pour, but in particular, like I really wanted it to be a whiskey where somebody was like, I can pour this right now, take a sip, and then wait an hour and take another sip and get a different experience out of it. Like that's pretty exciting whiskey too. So those are the ways in which we were thinking about the whiskeys.
They're really, and I guess I'll kind of sum it up. I know we're a little over an hour or whatever now. So
I'm sorry. Yeah,
no, and that's fine. I mean, I think they're really fun, delicious whiskeys in their own right. So, I mean, you guys, everyone, watching this now or the replay, if there's one or both that fits what it is you think it is that you're going to enjoy, I will say this. I mean, in being able to have batches, 1 through 4, they're all fantastic whiskeys, period. They all offer something different and unique. And that's the fun part about trying these, I think we're overanalyzing some of this sometimes. At the end of the day, if it's like a really good whiskey, it's a really good whiskey, period. These are all one. Are there any besides 3 and 4 available now? Is batch 1 still available?
There are some drops. There are some drops of batch 1 left. There's none of it left in warehouse. But batch 1 is available on a handful of stores that still ship. So I think depending on where you are, you can get batch 1 still. Batch 2, but it's not available.
It's not available on the website though. It's not available on the website.
No, I think 1 is still available on the website. Maybe. Okay. If it's not, that's recent. And I'll talk to Zach about that.
All right.
And 3 and 4 are obviously still on the website, but 2 is gone everywhere. Actually, I won't blow up his spot because I always feel bad when this happens. But a really obviously Canadian, a Canadian hockey player who plays for an NHL team, sent us a message on Instagram and was like, "Hey, I love your whiskeys. I have 1, 3, and 4. I can't find 2 anywhere. Do you know who has it still?" And I was just like,
yeah. Oh boy. That sounds like a moment where you have to dip into your own stash to appease the person who needs it.
I did. Yeah. I grabbed a bottle. I was like, I can't tell you where 2 is available because I don't know if it's available anywhere anymore. Yeah. But I have a handful of bottles in the basement and I'll ship you one.
As far as let's talk about that before we wrap things up. As far as where the distribution or shipping, about how many states do you ship to?
Good question. Yeah. So the rules are complicated, and basically we have distribution in California, Florida, Massachusetts, New York, which basically means it's physically in stores there. Okay. And then on top of that, we use a clearing service that hooks directly to our website, and they'll ship it to roughly 40 states. Oh man, Matt, we are fixing that. Matt Junak says not Michigan. Yeah. Sad face. Matt, Michigan is on the very short list. We're going to break into Michigan. We're going to break into Michigan this year. I promise. So we're trying to work on a few of the states that, God, the rules are weird. So did I admit to hand delivery? No, of course not. Yeah, I have actually hand delivered a bunch of whiskey in the past, including my own. But yeah, basically, there are a handful of states that are really tough, where they have really strict laws and they won't allow anybody to ship into them. And that's about it. But about 40 states, I can't lift.
All right, so the vast majority of states.
We're trying to increase that quickly. We're very much trying to increase that quickly. It's tough. It's particularly tough. I was looking at, when we sell into a state, like we sell into California, there are 2 accounts that do 100 cases for us, like literally in 2 hours. Yeah. And that's amazing for us. But the problem is we made 2,700 and change bottles of both of these. That's about 450 cases of each. Right. So if a state does 100 cases, in 2 accounts, how do you break into new markets?
Exactly.
So we're doing our best to make anybody who's aware of Found North and wants it, make it available to them. The number one question we get is from Canadians: why aren't you in Canada? Really difficult, because we have all our licensing in the US and all the bottling here. We would actually have to get all of the licensing and all of the workforce into Canada to be available in Canada, and we're simply too small a company at the moment for that, but we're working on it. So for those of you who are from Canada and you're just sitting there, and Canadians are delightful human beings, so they're probably not sitting there, cursing us out. But for those of you who are, I'm sorry, be patient with us. We're trying to get it into Canada. We're working on it. We're doing our best. It'll be there. It'll be there as soon as is for us.
All right, so I think we covered a lot, and this was what I generally wanted to get out to people was the understanding of what it is you guys are doing, the slight differences versus a lot of the American style whiskeys. I mean, I think coming off of batches 1 and 2, I mean, I think you guys have nailed 3 and 4. I mean, they're on par with 1 and 2, which was to come out of the gate with 1 and 2. And then to try to have to now maintain that, I mean, that was going to be a difficult task. And I think you've met and maybe even slightly exceeded it, to be honest. So they're fantastic batches. I've dropped the links in here. Trust me, guys. You saw the tasting notes, what some of them had to offer. If there's one or both that seem like they're going to kind of fit your profile, I would say it's going to be something different. It's fun. It's delicious, all of that. So, I mean, kudos to you guys. I mean, I think you're doing an incredible job. And I hope for your sake that this year becomes kind of that year where people kind of step outside the box a little bit and try something a little bit, different. And this falls in that category of all of that. Before we go, so here's one other thing Nick and I were talking about. We did it last year is we'll do another kind of virtual tasting. We'll figure out about maybe how many people are interested in doing it. That'll gauge, what we do as far as having to get samples and stuff out to people. But that's going to happen. So I'll send this off to more than likely to the patrons first, see who's interested. Hopefully there'll be some that were part of 1 and 2. Hopefully there'll be some different ones to get, them, kind of introduced to the brand a little bit, but to have more fun and really kind of allow people to experience, this whiskey. And I'm excited to share your whiskey with other people. I think it's going to be a really, really fun thing to do. So Nick, again, thank you so much. So now we're looking forward to batches 5 and 6. So I'm not going to ask you when and all that, and hopefully that will be a little bit down the road or whatever it may be. But I'm looking forward to whatever it is you guys come up with next. It'll be fun. I know that. So,
man, I couldn't be more grateful for you having me on the show. It's always a pleasure, and a particularly active and fun audience. So thank you guys. Like really, really awesome. Second, I cannot wait to do the tasting. The tasting's great because I get to talk a lot more. No, I'm kidding.
That's not possible. That's not possible. That's not possible.
But lastly, in terms of what's coming next, oh my goodness. The logistics of getting alcohol to market has become unbelievable. We have run out of everything you could possibly imagine. Our whiskey's landed about 3 months too late. Like, you have no idea. But that being said, we are working on some really cool stuff. I think the most exciting of which will probably be our single barrel program that we're rolling out, which won't just be like accounts only kind of thing. We get asked about batches we get asked about single barrels all the time, obviously from accounts that we sell to. We can't just take, there isn't a single barrel of batch 2. Everybody asks, can we get a single barrel of batch 2? Doesn't exist. We had a bunch of barrels of this and we had a bunch of barrels of this. We made batch 2 so we had to actually create a blend that would then be able to be put into single barrels, and we did that in December, and this year we'll start releasing single barrels. So I think that's going to be the most exciting thing we do. That being said, we blended something for one of our batches. I think it'll be a batch release, although who knows, it might be a special release. And I'm telling you right now, Scott, I'm going to just send you a sample of it. I'm so tempted to just send you a sample of it as blended from my own stocks.
That's great. Hey, I'm looking forward to whatever it is you guys do. So hey, to that note, if you're not part of the Mash and Journey Whiskey Club, and you want whatever the blended whiskey that we end up doing with these guys,
perfect.
You're gonna want it for sure. So Nick, thanks so much. I'm super excited for everything that you guys are doing. I love all of the batches that you've put out. Super excited for all of that. So I mean, keep doing what you guys are doing. Now, hopefully, you keep pushing the envelope a little bit more and doing some fun and different things. Look forward to at some point bringing one of those single barrels to the Mash and Journey Whiskey Club. That will be a lot of fun. It's what we try to do, bring fun and different. And I guess second, we're looking forward to everything that you guys have going on. So before we go, where can people find you? All of those good things.
Great question. Yeah. So first of all, if you email founders@foundnorthwhisky.com, Nick@foundnorthwhisky.com, team@foundnorthwhisky.com, basically anything you could think of to put before @foundnorthwhisky.com, it will probably go to me. I absolutely love answering emails, questions, it doesn't matter. Legitimately, my favorite part is like interacting with people. People send me hilarious stuff, from the simplest little question to like, I've received emails you would not believe, and I just enjoyed them immensely. So please, if you have questions and you want to ask me directly, I would consider it an honor to answer those questions for you. Second, we communicate. We have a Facebook page. We rarely use it. We use Instagram a lot more. It's @Found North Whisky. And then of course our website is foundnorthwhisky.com. Or just Google Found North Whisky. We'll be the first hit. But please communicate with me, talk to me, hit me up. I'm absolutely pumped to hear from you.
You guys won't regret your purchase of any of them. Whatever ones you're able to get, do it. I think it's a hell of a whiskey journey, we'll say. I mean, they're incredible. They're incredible whiskeys. I mean, kudos to you guys. So, Nick, thank you so much. Greatly appreciate it. Hey, everybody in the chat, thank you guys for joining tonight. I'm glad we were able to kind of put this thing together. For all the patrons, you guys will probably have first crack at putting together or being able to have the opportunity for the tasting. I'll post some stuff in there coming up. I'll be talking with Nick a little bit more as to some dates and all the kind of logistics of that. But stay tuned. We'll have more. Everybody, again, thank you so much for joining tonight. Nick, everyone in the chat, again, thank you so much. And remember, it's about the journey, not the destination. And we'll see you guys next week. Thanks, everybody, and have a great evening.